Welcome to part 2 of extending a file system for integrated enterprise solutions using role-based access control. I'm Professor Timothy Kentop in the Computer Science Department at the University of the Virgin Islands. We'd like to recap briefly what we're going to be doing, and the intent of the first part was to cover concepts. So what we'd like to do in brief is just to retrace some steps to refresh the memory. We're going to create a sensible, robust file system with resources for students enrolled in a single course we'll call CSC 444. In your case, you'll have a different, when you do the solution based on the demo, you're going to substitute and not use 444, but your own course designation. We're going to have 2 rival campuses. That's important. Each campus has formed a team for collaborative software development, one on St. Thomas and one on St. Croix. The lead directory, we're going to call the grandparent directory, provides read and execute resources for all students in the course on both campuses. The 2 subdirectories, or parent directories, site directories, will provide read and execute resources for only students in a given team. So only St. Thomas students can see what's in the St. Thomas site folder. Only students in St. Croix can see what's in the St. Croix content folder, the site folder. And then we're going to have 6 subdirectories inside each of the sites, 3 on each site, 6 grandchild directories, we'll call them grandchildren, and that'll provide modifiable storage for each student. It'll be a home directory for their project, and then each project is viewable by their team members. So team members on St. Thomas can read and execute, but they can't change or modify. The folder structure will look something like this, and we're going to map nearly identical security principles, groups, security groups, to those like-named directories in order to achieve the right kind of role-based access control. So we're going to use progressive or graduated implementations of inheritance. We're going to turn it off, make changes, and then turn it on again to propagate the changes. So upstream security settings will be disabled so that we can make the changes we need. With this option here, disable inheritance, after we make the changes, for example, removing all users. In this case, for projects, we don't want all users on the system to view those folders. We only want the participants, the students and the sites and the class members to view this directory. So after we make that change, we're going to turn on the inheritance by checking a box below it that says replace all child object permission entries with inheritable permission entries from this object. So we click here to stop the upstream settings so we can change them. After we make the changes, to push those downstream into subdirectories, we're going to enable the setting. Our benefit of the solution is that all students will be able to reference common course resources. Team members can reference common site resources. Rival students cannot reference opposing sites or user directories. Students can readily reference work and resources by their peers. Each student can publish his or her own work intuitively. Changes are quickly and easily accomplished by changing group membership from if one student is a lead for the team, and then at the end of the project another student is a lead for the team. All you have to do is change the membership of the STT lead security group or STX lead security group and drag a folder and you're done. Perhaps the greatest benefit is that these resources and shares can be accessed and follow the student whenever they're logged into other servers or other hosts. And that's one of the magical things about role-based access control in an enterprise setting. You can automate access to each of those directories and shares. So we'll get started right away by maximizing our screen and on our server, you'll notice that when you log into your server, the name will be different. It won't be Virgo. And once again, instead of notional student accounts, you're going to be using live or real students in your team when you use this demo for your solution. So you won't use 444 and you won't use student 1, student 4, and so on. You'll use real student, first initial and last names. What we'd like to do is demonstrate how inheritance starts. If you create a folder, and by the way, we're going to right-click and go to Properties and then use the Security tab. We're not going to use the Quick List, but we're always going to use Advanced because there's a lot of features that are missing. You'll notice that the first set of security permissions that are configured for this folder are inherited from the root of the drive, and that they push down into each of the subfolders, each of the subdirectories. So if we check in here, we'll see that Team STAX and Team STT inside. Is it the same list? Yes, it's the same list. And let's check a student folder. So if we look inside the student folder, we'll see the same all the way down, and it's inherited from the root of the disk. So this is one way Microsoft provides access. Initially, they allow read and execute privileges to all users on the system. In Linux, that's not the case, but in Windows, they want to make it available. So what we're going to do is remove that, and we're going to take a single action to do that by using inheritance to our advantage. We're actually going to, from this folder, we're going to disable, make changes, and re-enable inheritance. So from the course folder, if we try to remove this, it'll bark. It'll say, hey, you can't remove user because this object is inheriting permissions from its parent, the E drive. You have to turn off the option before you do that. So that's why we have to turn it off. I'm going to disable inheritance, and it prompts me to ask if I want to remove all of them or just convert them. I'm going to convert them. Most of the time you'll want to convert them. So now you'll see that we have disabled inheritance. The button has changed from disable to enable. That's how you know it took effect. I'm going to select this security principle and remove it. I'm going to remove this one also. And now what I want to do is check the box here. By the way, you're going to leave your own account listed because you created these folders. You're going to want to leave that in there until you finish, and you'll also see your own account listed under owner. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I want to turn on this change. I want to turn on inheritance from this directory downstream into the subdirectories on all levels, and I want to pull out users in all of those. So I'm going to check the box here to turn on inheritance from this point in the directory path. Originally it was just the root of the E drive. I'm going to turn on inheritance so that what's in 444 directory will propagate into the team directories and each individual directory. It used to be that you had to hit apply and go through a bunch of extra hoops in earlier versions of Windows. We're just going to click OK. And it actually gives us a prompt that says, hey, you're going to replace these defined permissions on all descendants. Are you sure you want to do this? When you're using inheritance, you want to be sure of what you're doing. We're going to say yes, and we're going to say OK. And now let's check to see if our results propagated. We're going to check the same folder, and yes, it did. And let's check the same student folder, or a different one this time. Let's look. And you'll see this change has taken effect also. So our first step for this process, and it is a process, is well underway. Now we're going to start with the team STT folder. We'll repeat the same actions in each of the team folders and in each of the student folders all the way down the chain. So now we're going to right click and go to properties. I'm going to go to security. I'm going to go to advanced. I'm going to disable inheritance because if I don't, I can't add. I'd like to add read and execute permissions for the STT team, but if I try to do that, it's going to say, oh, no, I take that back. It might allow me to do that, but it may also say, yeah, we want to disable inheritance and then make the change and then re-enable it. It's just a good practice. So I'm going to disable inheritance from this level. I'm going to convert. I'm going to add the team STT security group. And I want read and execute list folder contents and read. And so you see that applies to this folder, subfolders, and files. So that's how the student files are viewable by their teammates. We're going to turn inheritance on again, and we're going to say OK. We'll get the same warning. Do you wish to continue? Yes. And we'll say OK. We'll do the same for Team STX. We'll go into advanced. We're going to disable inheritance because we want to discretely have control over inheritance on each level. I'm going to convert, and then that way the inheritance is blocked from above and below. That way when we make changes later on to the CSC 444 folder, it won't propagate all the way down into the team sites. We're going to add STX, Team STX. We're going to accept the permissions. It's read and execute. We're going to turn on inheritance from this point. And then we're going to hit OK, get the same result. And what we want to do is check inside here to see, did the students in St. Thomas inherit read privileges as members of the team? And they did. So they're members of the team. Their team can read and execute contents of their folder, each other's folder, but they can't change, they can't modify. This is what we want. Let's check the STX side just to be sure we're good. We'll come up here, STX side, look at student 1. That way we get a chance to see if other things are tracking like they're supposed to. It's the first time we've looked in student 1. We see users are gone, team STX is read execute, and we're good to go. Now we're going to make changes for each student. So inside each of the student folders, we're going to want to repeat the same process. So that means we're going to disable inheritance, make changes, and enable inheritance. We're going to disable inheritance. We're going to convert. If we choose the other option, it would empty the screen. We don't want that. We're going to add, for student 1, more control for the student who owns this folder. And we'll change ownership in a second. So we're going to do this and enter student 1. And this time we're going to select modify. Why not select full control? If you select full control, it means student 1 can actually delete the home folder, student 1. We don't want to do that. We don't want to give student 1 so much power they can hurt themselves. So we're going to say okay, and we want to make sure that anything that student 1 creates in the future will also propagate the same way into subdirectories he or she creates, into new files, into new file system objects. So we're going to hit replace, and then we're going to say OK, and yes, and OK, and we're going to also change ownership. So we're going to go back into security, back into here. We're going to change the ownership from your account to student 1. That way student 1 is the owner of this directory. This is a privilege. It's a security designation. We're going to enter student 1. And the moment we do, you'll notice that it gives you an opportunity to push this change into subcontainers and other objects. We want to check that box because anything that student 1 creates, anything from this point forward, we want student 1 to own it. We're going to hit OK again, and OK, and repeat the process for each of the student folders. And with the magic of video, we're going to pause this, duplicate these on all the other student folders, and then be ready for our next step. To ensure that we've made the changes that are proper, we want to see what the effect is. If I attempt to go into the security settings again, on the student folders I've completed, and I've done student 1 through 6 now. If I click on advanced under security, if I click in advanced, you should see it may block your view at first, where you have to click advanced and then continue. It says you must have read permission. Oh, there's one more step we forgot. We need to remove our own listing from the student folders. So we left that in place on the other folders, but we're going to pull that out. That's a best practice. You don't want students thinking that the system administrator is in your Kool-Aid, so I'm going to go back and make that change, and then we'll see what we were talking about just a moment ago. So starting with student 6 and working backwards, if I remove and then make sure that this is inherited, because I don't want my account to pop up again with other items that are created, other directories, other files that student 6 is creating. I'm going to click OK, and yes, and OK. And now, if I've completed that process for all student folders, every time I go to check to see what's happening, you'll notice the screen has changed. It says, oh, you have to be able to get into advanced settings to see this. If you click advanced now, it's going to say you must have read permissions to view. You have to click continue. And this verifies that your own account has been removed from each of the student accounts. You still are able to get in here and see and do because your account is a member of the local administrators group, and it's appropriate for the administrators group on a system to be able to have access to directories and file system objects for support purposes. In some settings where security is where high security is the interest, you would even remove administrators, and that's not going to prevent administrators from rendering assistance. It just means that they have to take ownership in order to be able to get in. In any case, when privileged accounts get into directories and file system objects, where the permissions are limited, audit audit logs, the system logs will track who's getting into what, and you want that. So at this point, we've verified that the proper setting is in here. Again, I'm going to make this change on all the student folders so that they don't have that listing in there. So we're going to pause this again for a second. Once again, by the miracle of recording, we've paused and finished the process. We're going to modify each of the team folders now to allow the leads for each team, STT lead and STX lead, to be able to modify the contents of this folder. But we have to be careful about inheritance this time, because we don't want to push that privilege down into the student folders inside. So we're going to change the settings slightly, but team leads need to be able to create file system objects at each of the sites. We're going to be using a custom security group called STT lead, and then by changing the student members of that group, we can simply change out the leadership of the team without having to do a lot of extra hoops on the file system objects. In any case, we're going to right click and go into properties, and this time you should see a distinct difference. What we're going to do next is we're going to add the, we also want to make the team lead the owner of the file. So we're going to remove our own interest here. Just as we did with the students, we're going to remove this there. That'll be the last thing we remove. But we'll add the STT lead, and then we'll make sure that the permissions don't propagate for this folder, subfolders, and files, because we don't want the student subfolders affected. We're going to change the ownership, and then we'll remove ourself last. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the STT lead. And we're going to make it modify, not full control, but modify. And then we're going to change this so that we select this folder and files. We don't want any subfolders. We're going to say OK. And we're going to click OK without selecting replace all child object permission entries with inheritable permission entries from this object. We do not want this setting to propagate into student folders, so we are going to leave this unchecked. It's going to give us an error about student 4, 5, and 6, and that's to be expected because inheritance is blocked. It's another reason why we turn inheritance off at each level. There's 5 and 6, and we say OK, and then we're going to back. In each case we make a change, we're going to want to complete the change all the way and then back out. That's the best way to do it. If you make too many changes at once, it doesn't tend to work well. So now it's for this files and folders. We're going to change the ownership. We're going to put in STT lead. We are not going to replace owner and subcontainers and objects. Why? If we check this box, STT lead becomes the owner of everything in the student folders. We don't want that. We're going to leave this unchecked. I'm going to say OK and OK. And the last thing we're going to do is remove ourselves. So we're going to remove ourselves from this. Once again, we are not going to check the box because we don't want this configuration of security principles to propagate into student folders. All we're doing is removing our own name. We're going to see the similar errors that pop up with enumerate, and we're just going to accept them and continue. We're going to say OK, and we'll repeat the same process for Team STX in progressive stages. We'll pause the video for this time. Here you see we repeated the same steps with STX. Team STX folder, we put the STX lead in as owner, but we left the option to push that change unchecked. We added modify privileges just for this folder and the files within the folder, but not the student directories. And we removed our own. We'd also like to add the instructor. So CSC 444 has an instructor. While we're in here, we're going to use the same idea to add modify privileges only to this folder and files. That way the team lead or the instructor can populate the team folder, the site directory, with other file system objects, with other resources. So that's what we're going to do next. We'll add the principal for CSC underscore 444 underscore instructor. This is also a security group. Different instructors' accounts will be placed into this group, and that extends their permissions and privileges. We're going to modify, but we're only going to allow this folder and files. We don't want this to extend into the student folders. We don't want students to say, well, the instructor has it in for me, they could change things. Okay, so you see it's this folder and files, but the STX lead is still the lead. We're not going to check this box. We'll say OK, and we'll repeat the same process for the Team STT folder. And here you see we've done the same for the STT folder. We've added the instructor with modify permissions for the root of that folder only, and any files in there, but not the students listed. Now we're ready for our next step. We're going to configure the 444 folder in the same fashion. We want the instructor to be able to populate the course folder with resources, directories, and other file system objects. So once again, only this time we're going to give the instructor ownership of the course folder. And we will not be giving team leads the same thing. And we'll also pull our account out of there as a last resort. So we're going to add the instructor, with modify privileges for the course directory only. Yes, we did configure that also for the site, each of the sites. But you see it's this file and this folder and files. We're going to say OK. We are not going to check. We're going to leave this unchecked because we don't want it to propagate into each of the child directories, site directories, student directories. We're going to say OK. It's going to give us an error message about enumeration, which we expect because inheritance is turned off at that level. We're going to continue instead of cancel. Always continue. And we'll go back in and finish the process to make sure the ownership is there. So why wouldn't I do it in reverse order? Why wouldn't I remove myself and then change the ownership? Once I've lost permissions, I lose the ability to make changes. So that's why this last entry is the last one to come off. I will not check the box. I don't want site folders or student folders to inherit ownership from the instructor. I'm going to say OK, and then make the one last change to remove myself from the listing because we don't want an individual administrative account. That's also a good practice. If you don't list individual administrative accounts in security principles, that gives hackers less to identify you as an administrator. So that's another important reason for not listing individual administrators in folders and rather the groups. So we're going to remove this. We do not want this set of security principles to propagate down into the site or student folders. So we're going to leave this unchecked. The instructor is the owner of the course directory. He or she has modified privileges within that directory and with any of the files or objects he or she wishes to create, but that doesn't extend into the site folders unless it's explicitly there, and we did include that. We don't want it to propagate into the student folders. So we're going to leave this unchecked. We're going to say OK, and we're going to click to continue through our enumeration error. And we're done for this portion. Now we're ready to move on to the shares. It's important to note that when you share directories, the inheritance cannot be turned on or turned off at different levels. It's an all or nothing proposition. So when a folder is shared, it's important to have other measures in place to limit access in appropriate ways. You'll see in a moment how we do that. So we're going to share the course folder, and then that way it can be accessible with share level access, share level permissions across the network using network maps for drive letters. It's a form of mounting in Windows. We're going to exercise this option by going to sharing instead of security. So the security tab involves file level NTFS permissions that include graduated levels of inheritance and privileges and permissions. In sharing, that has to do with SMB shares, network sharing, or CIFS shares. And basically, we don't have the same levels of control. But we want to make sure that there's some comparisons. Oh, by the way, we always want to use the advanced sharing option. You never want to use this one. That's a wizard, and I've never really liked it. Use advanced sharing. It gives you more control up front. We're going to share the folder. We're going to put a $sign on it to hide it when it's on the network so that unless people know where it is, they can't connect to it. That's important for security reasons. And we're also going to remove the permissions for everyone. But we're going to add the permissions for the CSC 444 group. And we don't want the instructor, we're going to pick the first one. And we're going to accept read privileges. We're also going to add the instructor so that the instructor can change things in there. So we're going to add CSC 444, and if I hit enter, it gives me a choice, and this time I'm going to include the instructor listing, but this setting is going to be different than this setting. So the group can read, the class group can read, the instructor can change and read. We're going to click OK, and then OK, and then close. And we're going to do the same things for the team folders. I'm going to continue. It's because I'm a member of the administrators group. I'm going to use sharing, advanced sharing. You'll see here it was already shared with a $sign. The permissions include STT, the team, and then the team lead can change or read. We're also going to add the CSC instructor. Who will also have change read privileges. And this way the changes track with what we've done on the NTFS side. This is a good best practice because the network share level permissions match what's on the NTFS side. If somebody manages to get across the network security, they still have the NTFS file level permissions to contend with. The team itself can only read. We'll do the same for the Team STX folder, and then we'll show you something different that we do for each of the student folders. In the case of a student folder, we want to share the student folder, but we only want to provide modify or change. It's not called modify on the share level permission. It's called change. But we don't want others to have the ability to change inside there. So we're going to we're only going to create a share that's exclusive to the student because it's their home directory, their H drive. So in here you'll see that we have student share name, and the permissions have removed everyone, and the student themselves, he or she is able to change and read. We've done this for all of our students. Once you've completed it for all of the student folders, and if we're checking here, let's just make sure we've got them all. Looks like we have them all. One way to view all of the shares is to open up Server Manager. So on your own server, you want to open up Server Manager, and then under File and Storage Services, you want to select Shares. And this should provide you with a complete listing of all the shares that you've created and their associated local paths in terms of the directory. So we have the course share, we have each of the student shares, and we have each team or site share. Now we can map those to drive letters. That's the last thing we're going to do to make sure this works. We're going to, in each case, we're going to create a G drive for the team share, the respective team shares. We're going to create a student H drive, and then we're going to create an O for operating systems, or O drive. It could be P for programming, but we're going to create an O drive for the course folder. We want to log in as a student when we're doing this. So we want to make sure and check for validation of the shares by logging in as a student. And right now, I am logged in as myself. In your case, you're going to want to log in with your own login. All right, so at this point, I'm going to... So I am going to log in as student 1, or student 4. Student 4. To verify if the shares are working right. And now that I am student 4, I'm going to open up File Explorer, and I want to select this PC. Once I do, the menu at the top changes. I want to hit the computer menu, and there's a map network drive. I want to map a network drive. If I've done this correctly, I should be able to map the folders. And you'll see that from previous attempts at this walkthrough, I've been able to do that. So, oh, actually, you'll see that each of these are connected now, and that's because we had the script in place. For the purposes of this demonstration, to demonstrate the steps that you go through for the manual process, I'm going to disconnect each of these and walk through them manually. So, if we had a fresh login and we want to manually map these drive letters, we're going to click on this PC, go to the computer menu, and select Map Network Drive. Now we have an option to choose the G drive. And you'll see here this one's already been used before in showing, but we're going to put in Virgo. So // Virgo and .groovy.net / team _ STT $. Just so you see how this works, I'm going to choose a different drive letter here. So I'm going to type in //. So if I wanted to manually ascribe drive letter Z to the STT team folder, I would type in Virgo, use the fully qualified domain name, gruvi.net, and then /, and then team _ STT $. Don't think it matters, but I'll put in a capital T just in case. And I'm logged in as student 4, which is a member of the STT team, so I should be able to connect. And there you see the contents inside this share. I have read privileges to look inside the folder. If I double click inside students, I can see inside the students, but that's just a read connection. I'd like to make 2 more, one for the home folder and one for the course directory, again, just to demonstrate the manual process. So I'm going to go to this PC, computer, map network drive. We'll use drive letter Y this time, since it's manual. Once again, the name of the server. You'll use your own server name, groovy.net / and this will be the home folder. This will be student 4 with a $. If I have change permissions on this drive letter, I should be able to put something in here. Let's test it. Let's just use a text document. And I'm going to save this. If I didn't have permissions to save to this folder or to make changes, it would prompt me to change the location of the save to my own desktop or another local directory, but it wouldn't allow me to save inside this. So now you see I have 2 drive letters connected and the path is showing. I'm going to do the last one just to make sure the course directory works. This PC, computer, I'm going to map a drive letter, we'll use X. Groovy.net net /CSC underscore 444 $if student 4 is a member of the STT team, which in turn is a member of the 444 group. I should be able to get in here and do this. I'm going to finish, and it says I don't have permissions. So we're going to have to troubleshoot that. Sometimes there's, we'll need to check to see if the student 4 account is in STT, and if STT team is inside 444. We would be able to connect at that point. It's odd, but it shows we have a connection here. Ah, okay. In this case, you see that we missed the NTFS security setting. We added the instructor for modify on this folder and files, but we didn't add the CSC 440 group, which would have read and execute. And so even though the share permissions were set, what we need to do is add CSC 444, and we want the group in there. We want read and execute, but we want it for this folder, subfolders, and files. No, we don't want that option. If we keep this option, permissions to read in the 444 group, to which all students belong, will be allowed to look into opposing site folders. So what we want to do is make it this folder and files only. That will deny student 4 the right to navigate down into the STX folder, and we'll verify that in just a moment. So we're going to say yes. We don't want that to push down into all the other subfolders, so we're going to leave that box unchecked. Now we're going to verify by logging out and logging in as student 4. Once again, we have for additional credit, you can configure automation where the login script connects the drive letter maps. Please consult the section on your solution for additional credit. And that's already set up here. We're going to use another user. We're going to use student 4. And if we open up File Explorer and our automation worked, our login automation worked, when we click on this PC, our drive maps should appear. And you'll see that the team folder for STT is set to drive letter G, so the team site or group, G for group, home directory for the student, H for home, O for operating systems. So we're saying the course is an operating systems course, O for OS. So if that's true, I should be able to double click into here, and I should be able to see my own team members. But if I back out and try to go into STX, it says I don't have permission. So there you see both NTFS and share level permissions that are preventing, well, not the share level in this case, but the NTFS permission prevents a view. I can't read or execute opposing students or the opposing team resources. So that's proof that from drive letter O that the granular levels of inherited privileges, permissions are working properly. If I go back to this PC and I look at my own folder, here's the test file that I put in there. I can open it. I can add to it. I can save it. And I can create a new one if I need to. But if I go back inside there, it's saved properly. Any system I log into, I have drive letter G, H, and O that follow me. And let's see what happens when I get into the team folder. Oh, no, that's the H folder. Sorry. Let's go back. Let's go into the team folder. And let's choose another student. So if I go into the student, my own student 4 folder, I can still work this way. But let's say, actually, no, let's go back. Let's say I try to change things. And I want to create something new. My permissions work because it's student 4. But if I go into student 5, I can view whatever they do. However, if I try to create something new, it says I don't have permission. So I can read what's in there. I can execute what's in there, but I can't change anything that's in there. If I open it up and I want to save it, I have to save it as to my own home folder or the desktop or another disk that I can write to. But I can't save the change to student 5. So what we've done is used privileges and permissions with inheritance to disable and enable changes at each level of the directory path so that we have a robust file system resource that's extensible across an entire organization, an Active Directory domain. And if we automate this with login scripts, every time I log in on any machine in the domain, I have those drive letters available. This concludes our Part 2 demo of Part 1 concepts. Thank you for joining us. Please be sure to check out the companion YouTube for advanced credit or additional credit.